All right, thanks for the opening statements. We're going to go straight to the rebuttals, 8-minute rebuttals, beginning with Dan.
Yeah, just look at these over real fast.
Okay, there are three big problems with Hamza's arguments about, sometimes it's called the Kalam cosmological argument, and even Christian theologians use it too. And Hamza already alluded to a couple of the problems, although his defense against them were not good. First of all, this argument begs the question, because it makes an assumption. The universe began to exist, and so things that have a beginning have a cause, is basically what he's saying. Anything that has a beginning has a cause. Why does that beg the question? Because the existence of a beginningless thing or personality is the very conclusion you are arguing for in your argument. Allah is a beginningless thing. But you are assuming in your very initial premise that the universe can be divided up into two different sets. A set of things that begin to exist and a set of things that don't begin to exist. And yet you offer only one possibility to fill the definition of things that don't begin to exist, which is God, which is Allah. If Allah is the only thing, or if a creative being, internal transcendent being, is the only thing that fits that bill, then you have effectively begged the question by saying everything that begins to exist translates to everything except God. So your first premise is saying everything except God needs a cause, which begs the question. It's circular reasoning. You're bringing your conclusion into your premise. You can't do that logically. You can get out of that. There are ways for you to avoid begging the question by either defining conceptually or potentially some kind of an item other than God that does not begin to exist, in which case your phrase would be meaningful, it would be coherent. If we all understood, and none of us have experience of anything that doesn't begin to exist, how could we? In the universe we live in, we can't point to anything that doesn't begin to exist in time because we live in a temporal universe. So right there from the start, you are kind of secretly packaging your conclusion into your premise by assuming the very thing you're trying to prove. You've already pointed out that the argument is self-refuting, although you think you had a response to it. When you say that an actual infinity cannot exist in reality, or who did you quote saying, the infinite is nowhere to be found in reality, but you say that God is some kind of a different kind of infinity. He's not a discrete infinity. But let me ask you this. The person who's going to make the football pass has to get permission from the coach, who has to get permission from somebody. If there is a God, if Allah exists, and Allah somehow, either in or out of time, let's assume that it makes sense to talk about causality outside of time. I don't think it does, but let's just assume that it does. Because how do you know what, if without temporal antecedents, how do you know what came first? That's how we know how causality works, is because of time. We don't look at an effect and then think the cause happened later. That's how we know what the very word causality means. But let's just assume that in some strange way, because of our limited minds, there is this being up there outside of time who can function in a causal way. Before Allah created the universe, in your interpretation, He must have had some thoughts. He must have decided for some reason, either I'm lonely, or my justice, or my holy, or whatever his reason. He must have had some thoughts for it before, or if you don't like a temporal word, antecedent to the decision to create it. There must have been a thought in the mind of this being, antecedent. And then let me use the word before, even though that's a temporal word, because in cause and effect we can talk about logic. One thing follows another, whether inside of time or out. And so before or antecedent to that thought, Allah must have had a preceding thought. And before or antecedent to that thought, Allah must have had a preceding thought. And according to you, these are thoughts in the mind of a being. According to you, there cannot exist an infinite regression into a timeless non-beginning in reality. Therefore, in the mind of Allah, there must have been a first thought. If an actual infinity cannot exist in reality, we're not talking about discreteness, we're not talking about numbers, we're not talking about where does the set of negative numbers begin. And even you are correct to point out that we can't find that within reality. If we can't find that within reality, then neither can we find that within the mind of a God. A God would be subject to the same limitations that you think the universe is subject to. If the universe cannot come from nothing, then neither can God come from nothing. If God exists, if Allah exists, He is a thing, He's something, right? He's not nothing. If nothing comes from nothing, then Allah can't come from nothing. Allah had to have a creator as well. And if you posit, therefore, the existence of a being or an entity that is eternal, then how can you fault scientists for hypothesizing that the universe itself is eternal? Could be eternal. Where did I do my water? When you're talking on the clock, you know, your mouth doesn't lubricate like normal. So. I won't say thank God, I'll say thank Jeff for the water. We should give thanks where thanks is due, not to some imaginary being. But another problem with this argument is that it's comparing apples and oranges. And I'm surprised that Hamza doesn't see this. The word universe these days refers to our particular universe that we're in now. Cosmologists don't use the word universe anymore. In fact, I don't think any cosmologists think it was a singularity anymore. You're reading science books from 20 years ago, I think. Hawkins has given up on the word singularity. No one thinks the Big Bang started with a singularity. Now, of course, most people think that we're at that minimum, that Planck distance, or whatever they call it, the Planck constant minimum. And in Dick Stenger's books, he talks about the possibility of a biverse, where time flows. And that point was really a point where time is flowing in opposite directions. But in any event, the confusion you're making here is you're confusing logical spheres. When Bertrand Russell was debating Copplestone back in the 40s, asking about the word universe, Bertrand Russell said, well, the word universe, today he would use the word cosmos because of the possibility of multiple universes. In fact, Hawking and even Paul Davies now are all on board with the high likelihood of there being a multiverse, in which case our particular universe that did begin with the Big Bang is just one of many. It's not the cosmos. So the problem you're making is that the mistake you're making, Hamza, is to confuse the word universe with cosmos. So yes, our particular universe did have a beginning in space and time, space-time. And like you say, it could be like a point of the North Pole. What's north of the North Pole? Well, the North Pole is just a point like any other. So it wasn't like there was the beginning of time where the clock started ticking. So you're comparing apples and oranges. Even if our particular universe did have a beginning, that beginning doesn't apply to the cosmos itself. What you're doing is you're trying to jump up a logical sphere. And what Bertrand Russell said to Copplestone, it would be like saying, well, since every human being had a mother, therefore the human race had a mother. That doesn't follow when you jump up from apples to oranges. And that's the logical mistake you're making by confusing and conflating logical spheres. So your arguments don't work, your evidence doesn't work, and during a further rebuttal, let's talk a little more about the Quran.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought that was a very interesting, emotional sermon towards the end. I almost felt like crying. I was feeling sorry for Dan Marker. I thought you were just about to cry. I was going to come and give you a big hug, you know? Because I thought you were so upset about your outdated cliches about religion, about the concept of hell. I mean, it's quite interesting that it's just like typical atheists, not to be stereotypical, of course, is that we fail to read about people. We fail to really want to connect with other human beings. When was the last time have we read an exegesis of the Quran, for example? When was the last time that we read what is Islamic law in the eyes of a Muslim? Do we do that? Or do we go straight to the shelf and say, what does Robert Spencer have to say? the guy who hates Islam. What does that say about our intentions? Do we have an emotional, intellectual atmosphere where we are listening with the intent to understand, or are we manufacturing a response? Something to think about. Okay, let's talk about Dan Barker's claims. First and foremost, you talk about God of the gaps. It's not God of the gaps. We don't say we don't know, then we just squeeze God in there. We actually reflect upon reality, the universe, we come to certain conclusions, we come to certain attributes, and then we see that there's a correlation between our view and what reality has told us. That's not God of the gaps at all. God of the gaps would be, I don't know, therefore God did it. So I think that's an outdated atheist cliche. Also, you're saying submission to God is not rational. Well, you said this about grammar. Let's change the definition here. Well, you could submit to yourself, submit to social conditioning, or submit to a higher rational being. What sounds more rational, people? To submit to a higher rational being. If you know that rational being exists and you have evidence for that. So you could play with words and we could preach. I mean, I think your preachiness has carried with yourself in your atheistic age. And I think, you know, we can't have our cake and eat it. I don't like Christianity, but I'm going to stay a preacher.
Thank you.
No worries, dude. Anyway, so the point is about the God's names and attributes. We don't say all or infinite. What we say is God is the merciful. And Islamic theology says that we reconcile His names and attributes. The in the loving or the merciful means He's greater than human beings. And then when we look at all His names and attributes, we see them via His oneness and we reconcile them together. We don't say He's infinite this, infinite that, infinite this. No, Islamic theology says He's the merciful, the just, and we take these names and attributes and we reconcile them together, for instance. Also, you talk about difference of opinion. Well, that's going to happen when you have human agency anyway. You have that with anything. And we consider difference of opinion in the Islamic tradition as a mercy. Imagine everyone being the same. Imagine everyone looking the same and acting the same. I mean, what's with that? That's boring, right? Yeah? We're not boring people, Muslims, you know? Also, you talked about the Quran is based on hearsay and testimony. I mean, surely, I don't believe you said that. I was so upset. I thought you were a clever guy. I mean, when we look at the science of textual integrity of the Quran, we see that the historical scientific principles applied to the textual integrity of the Quran surpass any known Western type of history. For example, we have a philosophy of the matan, which is the text itself, and the isnad, which is a chain of narration. And each person in the chain of narration has a biography. Was he trustworthy? Did they meet each other? So the sciences of textual authority in the Quran are extremely, extremely sound. But significantly, what I'd like to add is the main part of the preservation of the Quran is based on oral tradition. An oral tradition. And it's not just Chinese whispers, because it's based upon something in Arabic called mutawatir reporting, which is recurrent testimony. Now, recurrent testimony, as C.A. Cody in his book Testimony says, many things that we believe in is because of testimony. You probably believe China exists because of testimony. Many of us have never been to China before, but yet we believe China exists. Now, with regards to the Quran, it's based on recurrent reporting, that it's been reported by so many different people at different times and places, all going back to the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. To claim that that's not the Quran is to claim a conspiracy, that they had a time machine and conspired together to say this is what the Quran is going to be. Also, you talked about the contradiction. Please find it for me. I've never heard of that before. That sounds like it came from left field. Also, the threat of violence, for example. I mean, come on, this is so shallow. What we're saying is, a disbeliever is someone who has been given evidence and out of his arrogance rejects it. Out of his arrogance. Like kufr, the disbeliever means someone who has a veil over the heart. They cover. Like, you know, the farmer who puts a seed in the soil and he covers the seed. Like, you're covering the truth. This is what we mean. We don't believe someone like a red Indian who's never heard about Islam. We don't say that person is going to hell. We don't have this type of theology. That's a straw man. He's built a logical fallacy. He's built a straw man of Islam. I suggest you need to start reading around the intricacies of Islamic theology. Also, you have to understand the Quran is a thinking book. For example, the things I've talked about are based in the Quran. As the Quran says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not use your minds? أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ? Do they not reflect within themselves? وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ? And in themselves, do they not see? Are you going to base your life on your forefathers? Even if it's based on no knowledge? These are rational principles. It's an existential text that makes you think about the meaning of existence and who you are. You're being quite unfair, Dan, you know? Come on, let's be fair, man. Also, you talked about singularity. You know, singularity is not old. Vilenkin, 2008. Cosmologists in 2006. Even recently, cosmologists are understanding the concept of singularity. It's not old stuff. I mean, you could talk about Stephen Hawking all you like, but it doesn't mean he's right just because he's Stephen Hawking. I mean, that's an argument of authority, right? You're standing on the shoulders of giants. Also, you talked also about that why isn't everyone a Muslim? Or why isn't the evidence on the table? That's again a logical fallacy. You're standing on the shoulders of giants. Because people don't do it. It's like the fallacy of social reasoning. Like, just because the majority of people don't believe in it, therefore I shouldn't believe in it. I mean, is that critical thinking? I mean, that's like Nazi Germany to me. Everyone wants to kill a Jew, maybe I should kill a Jew too. Yeah? I mean, come on, is that right behavior? Dan? Surely not. Also, you spoke about apples and oranges. Again, you have a grammar problem. No, I see the universe as an object because it has a spatial temporal boundary. I'm not saying it's a category of things. So I don't think your argument here works. And also, you think that we have a special pleading to God with this argument. But since the atheist has always maintained the same about the universe, as beginning and uncaused, then you're doing the same thing. I mean, interestingly, Professor Anthony Flew said that we need to make a choice. Either the universe is uncaused, or the cause of the universe is uncaused. And I think in light of tonight's evidence, we know that the universe is caused, and the cause of the universe is uncaused. Also, you talked about, well, then who caused God? Well, the thing is, God never came into being. Rather, we know we have evidence the universe came into being. And finally, you spoke about God's thoughts, but we say that that's a fallacy, it's a straw man argument with regards to who God is. We say that his intentions, if you want to put them even into that kind of words, are eternal. And there's a difference here. There's not like a discrete, finite kind of process going on that you could claim that the actual infinity doesn't make sense with regards to God itself, which I discussed in the initial part of my presentation. But more of that in the next part of the rebuttals. Thank you.
One more round of rebuttals and then the closing statements. This round of rebuttals are 5 minutes each. Again, beginning with Dan.
So, did Allah create the universe and say, oh look, I created the universe, now I better decide to create the universe? Did it happen that way? Doesn't deciding come before or antecedent to action? In the mind of a deity, in the mind of Allah, a decision precedes an action. Therefore, in the mind of Allah, according to you, there's an infinite series of preceding decisions. I do read the Quran for myself. I didn't consult a lot of these authorities who, in fact, if you do consult authorities, they disagree with each other a lot. And you all know that within Islam, there's arguments, there's disagreements, and that's wonderful. But that strikes against the uniformity of the teaching of this book. I read the Quran for myself. I've read 2 different English translations myself, with my own mind, with my open mind and an open heart, and I reject it on rational grounds. It is irrational, it is insulting, we can do better. Read Shakespeare. Shakespeare can't be reproduced by anybody. Read Moby Dick. Read some other wonderful works of literature. The Quran is amazing, but it's so repetitive. How many of you read it? It's so repetitive, over and over, and hell and believers and this and it's obviously it's not poetry, because who would ever set that to music? But let me read to you here. Here's 4, Surah number 493. Anyone who kills a believer intentionally will be cast into hell to abide there forever and suffer God's anger and damnation. Forever. Hell is forever. But Surah 11, and I didn't get this from a book, I just got this from reading myself. And those who are doomed will be in hell For them will be sighing and sobbing, where they will dwell so long as heaven and earth endure. So the punishment in one surah says they suffer in a hell forever. The verse in another surah, which you're asking me to read with an open mind, contradicts this surah. When I was a Christian apologist, I would have been real good at finding some rationalization. But the plain words of the text here show me that this book is contradictory. So please don't accuse me of special pleading or of looking up somebody else's. This is from my own reading. The Quran does not surpass science. Why didn't Muhammad tell us, or why didn't Allah tell Muhammad something about, why didn't he say, by the way folks, wash your hands before you eat? Why didn't he tell us about the germ theory of disease or something? Why didn't he come up with these basic kind of rough ideas? And even in the Bible you can find supposed answers to prophecy that if you interpret them a certain way, more or less comport with what we think we know about cosmology or about science today. But there's so much more useful that the Quran could have said to us, that Allah could have said to us, which would have been much more important than bow down and submit and make sure you're pointing in the right direction, because the direction's important. And by the way, that makes Islam a kind of flat earth idea. Why is it important to point to Mecca? By the way, Mecca is not that way. Mecca is actually kind of this way, and yet people, you know, the mihrabs, is that what it's called? They seem to be pointing out into outer space somewhere, if you think about it. It's a flat earth mentality, and I know you think a lot in the Quran and a lot of Islam is metaphorical, but then why can't we also think, therefore, that God himself is metaphorical? If there is metaphor with hell and heaven and language use, then why can't we think that Allah himself is also a metaphor that Muhammad came up with? You say that the authority of the Quran is based on testimony that has a link. We don't know that. You're taking somebody's word for that. Nobody was there in the cave with Muhammad. He came out and told us what he said. Nobody was there to hear it except Muhammad. So we're taking Muhammad's word, just like you would take Joseph Smith's word that he saw the angel Moroni, whom I'm sure you doubt exists. I doubt that Muhammad actually heard a voice unless he was schizophrenic in some way, which happens with a lot of religious leaders. I doubt that that actually happened. Yes, conspiracies happen. All religions are a conspiracy in some way or another. The people are conspiring to put their best faith on it. The origin of the Quran is not that special. And by the way, you're wrong to say that the universe is an object. If you're talking about our particular event horizon of the universe we live in right now, this universe, yes, it had a beginning, it has an unbounded infinity to it. But the word universe, as you're using it, means cosmos. Cosmos is the collection of set of all things. The cosmos is all things that exist. Therefore, the cosmos cannot be a thing. The cosmos is a set of things. So you're comparing apples and oranges. Your logic is irrational.
Okay, this is very good. Let's go to the Shakespeare question. Shakespeare is inimitable. Oh Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou a Romeo? Deny thy father, deny thy name. Or we can make it more Islamic. Oh Abdullah, deny thy mother, deny thy tribe. You know, we can make it that. But the point is, see, I want you to connect with me. I know you don't know what I'm talking about because you have no idea of the Arabic language. You have no idea about the intricacies of eloquence and the sciences of Arabic. So I think the most sincere thing for you to do is say, Hamza, I don't know, man. Let's discuss this like two gentlemen. We don't want to beat each other about it. I want to know, what does this argument mean? Maybe it might be a valid argument. Throwing the Shakespeare one is so shallow because Shakespeare, or Sheikh Zabur, essentially, Shakespeare, for example, he articulated some of his plays in the iambic pentameter. Who studies English literature here? Iambic pentameter has been replicated by many people. As a matter of fact, his contemporary Christopher Marlowe has been accused of some of his works. So the Shakespeare argument is not an argument. Also, the contradiction, I didn't really get the verses, we'll do that in the Q&A. Someone bring the question up, please. Also, the funny thing is about washing your hands. Why didn't the Quran tell us to wash your hands? The Quran does tell you to wash your hands before every prayer, dude. And not just that, and he said before eating. You know the Prophet Muhammad, his sunnah, his way? Do you know what he did before he ate? Yes, sir, he washed his hands. And that's not a big deal. That's not a big deal, people. Also, testimony. See, the problem is, do I know that the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, saw the angel? The reason I know that is not based on testimony. The reason I know that is because he claimed it, and I know he was truthful because of historical evidence. And I know the Quran that he brought forth is a signpost to the transcendent. Also, if you want testimony, there are African tribes today who have never read an Arabic Quran, but they learn it from memory via an oral tradition all the way 1400 centuries back to the Prophet himself. To claim that the Quran is not intact would be to claim a conspiracy, which you're doing. Also, I disagree. I think you're just building a straw man of my argument, apples and oranges. That's not true. I'm considering the universe as a spatial temporal boundary as an object. I mean, you could argue about this till the cows come home. Also, you talked about flat earth, right? Well, this is not true because even the Quran itself mentions explicitly about basically the night and the day, and uses the word taqweer. Basically, if you go to Arabic language, it's like putting a turban on, you know, a round head. Yeah, so it indicates the opposite of a flat earth type of perspective. What else did you say? We didn't say much. I mean, you're a bit angry. You're angry at God, aren't you? Yeah. You sound angry at God, to be honest. Is this therapy for you? I mean, come on, man. It sounds like it's therapy for you, man. I mean, I study psychology. Cognitive behavioral therapy is cheap and it works. Thank you.
All right, 7 minutes of closing statements, beginning with that.
Okay, there was a lot we could not go into in much depth, but Hamza is completely missing this logical sphere thing, completely missing the point. Cosmologists today admit that this universe that we live in, and decades ago nobody would even use the phrase this universe. In Bertrand Russell's day, the word universe meant all of existence, everything. Today, the word universe doesn't mean all of existence, everything. Today the word we use is the word cosmos for all of existence and everything. The word universe today is a much smaller word. In fact, we talk about multiple universes. This universe, this particular event horizon that has this particular Big Bang within it. So you are absolutely right that this universe had a beginning. You're absolutely right that we can go back to a point at the Big Bang. Yes, this universe. But that's not the cosmos. You are taking observations from within this universe and then jumping out of that logical sphere to the bigger sphere of the cosmos, which, as I pointed out earlier, many are very happy about the possibility of a multiverse, or even without a multiverse. Explanations for the origin of this particular universe. That's why you are comparing apples and oranges. You can't take, suppose I were to say, use a bad argument, that every nation began with a war. The alliance of all nations began 20 years ago. Therefore, there was a war 20 years ago. Is that logical? No. Why? Because I'm confusing a set with the items within the set. Suppose I said every musician in an orchestra plays in harmony with itself. Therefore, it follows that every orchestra is playing in harmony with every other orchestra. That doesn't follow. You've jumped up a logical sphere and you're confusing. You're taking a finding from one level and trying to apply it to a higher level. That's the mistake you're making logically, and I'm surprised you don't see that. You've read books, you've studied these things, Hamza. It's comparing, and even Bertrand Russell in the 40s pointed that out, about the human race not having a mother. Okay, so we are all human beings. Right? We're all biological animals. Any of us could breed with each other. We all come from a common ancestor somewhere back there. We all have common needs and wants. I'm not ashamed of being a preacher. I think being a preacher is fine. And it actually is kind of good therapy, yes. And I'm not ashamed of being angry sometimes. Especially not against a God who doesn't exist, but against followers of His who insist on threatening people like me with a physical torment, which is what your book does. There's no doubt about it. Anybody reading the Quran in any language can see that there is a threat of physical violence in that book. How are you going to talk your way out of that? It's there. It's plain. And I think all of you Muslims in the room agree. In fact, I debated a Muslim in Colorado last year, and when I mentioned that, you're going to be sitting on the couch under the fig tree with the young virgins looking down at me and laughing while the skin's burning off, and he put his thumbs up and he smiled. Yes, yes. He was happy about that. And by the way, there are Islamic scholars who do say, and I can give you tapes of it, that Allah is infinitely merciful. They use that phrase. One that I debated in Queens said Allah is infinitely merciful. He is ever merciful. He is all merciful, and He is infinitely just. So maybe you don't use those phrases, but some do. And my point was that if you define God that way, then you can show that that God is a married bachelor and does not exist. You might have a different definition, but I've never heard a coherent definition of what this God is. If God is made out of a spirit, how do you distinguish a spirit from nothing? Like the philosopher Delos McCown said, the invisible and the non-existent look very much alike. How do you know what a spirit is? We know things exist by how much space they take up. Things that exist can be measured. If they can't be measured, they don't exist. If they can't be limited in some way, along dimensions or how much time they take up, or weighed or measured, then they don't exist. And since I've never seen a definition of this Allah or God that in any way can be defined coherently or logically or measured in any way, we cannot say that that being does exist. It exists only as a concept in your mind and in the mind of Muhammad and in the mind of people all over the world. They have this idea of this being that exists. But we are all human beings with basic general human nature, and we all have the same needs and wants. What difference does it make? Why do you think it's more rational for you to use this religious belief of yours to live a life of meaning and purpose when millions of good people don't believe in your God and yet live lives that are just as good, if not better, than yours? What's the point? If the point is submission to avoid an eternal punishment, then that is despicable. If the point is to live a good life, then I applaud that. In fact, I think in the Quran, from my reading, there's more emphasis on good works and helping the poor within Islam than there is within the Christian New Testament. And I think that's one of the positives about Islam that we can say. Most Muslims really are concerned about directly helping the poor. But think about this. Picture this equation, all right? And then see if you can solve it. Religion plus good works equals good works. Now solve for religion. What's the point? Why? Why spend all your time bowing down in prayer? Why spend all your time doing these rituals? If you separate the good from all the religions, Islam has a lot of good in it. So does Christianity, so does Judaism. All religions have good in it. The good is not a religious idea, it's a humanistic idea. The good is peace, avoiding harm, minimizing harm, increasing well-being, or whatever you want to call it. The good is the human needs and wants that we all share together. The things that distinguish a religion from the common, transcendent good that all of us human beings have, those things are not good things. What day of the week you should worship, what kind of clothes women should wear, what kind of recitations you should make, those are a waste of time. It's more rational to spend your time and your energy doing actual good rather than investing in a divisive, irrational religion.
Sorry. Okay, good. Thank you very much for your patience, brothers, sisters, and friends. Okay, first and foremost, see, what's interesting in the last 10 years in the sociology of religion, there's been academic studies, longitudinal studies as well, that have shown that religion actually has a positive correlation to well-being in contrast to the atheist worldview. I mean, if we were to reduce it on maybe Dan Barker's disposition today and mine, you may be able to understand that as well. He's a bit angry today. Anyway, so according to the sociology of religion, it has shown that religious people have better mental health, better physical health, lower criminality, high levels of happiness, and high levels of altruism and philanthropic activity. This is academic results, not just I'm just feeling this, right? Example number one, in 2000, Schnittke, in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion, examined a data set of nearly 3,000 adults from the general population, and he found religious involvement had no significant relation with depression, and he found that religiousness was a buffer against mental distress. Also, in the Handbook of Religion and Health, edited by Harold Koenig and others, the authors reviewed 2,000 published experiments, and they found that young people have significantly lower levels of drug and alcohol abuse, criminal delinquency, and attempted suicide. Happiness. The Gallup survey on religion in America concluded that people who agree with God, that agree that God is very important in their lives, are twice as likely to report being very happy in contrast to an atheist. So God makes you happy, man. So be happy, people. Yeah. Also, political scientist Robert Putnam, he surveyed 200 volunteer organizations, and it showed there was a positive correlation between religiosity and membership of volunteer organizations. Take the Index of Global Philanthropy in 2007. It states, which you don't state, religious people are more charitable than non-religious, not only given to their own congregations, but also regardless of income and other demographic variables. So, you know, I think it's another outdated cliche from the atheist. Again, with your apples and oranges, again, I'm saying to you, I'm treating the universe as an object, has a spatial, temporal boundary like we've discussed. We could argue this again until the cows come home. Then you mentioned maybe something like a multiverse. Look, philosophically the multiverse for me doesn't make sense for about 7 reasons. Number one, the multiverse remains a hypothesis and is very highly speculative, okay? It's a highly speculative mathematical exercise. 2, I would say it's immature and it's a speculative theory raising a lot of difficulties. 3, if we consult Occam's razor, multiverse, bloated universe, single God, bloated universe, single God. What's the most comprehensive and simple explanation here? Also, spontaneous quantum fluctuations create more questions than it answers. How can a spontaneous quantum fluctuation create a universe? That's the question that you have to understand. It lacks rational force. Also, the universe, the multiverse itself is described by specific physical laws. These laws themselves include constants and boundary conditions, which have to be fine-tuned in the first place. So I think the multiverse argument is a non-argument. It's just basically an atheist wanting to push God out of the question all the time. Also, I want to finally end with one argument I didn't address, which was the problem of evil. The big atheist argument. You should spend 20 minutes on that. I think that's a strong argument. And basically, the problem of evil is saying that God is all good and He's all powerful, but there's a lot of evil, gratuitous evil, therefore He can't exist. But I think there are some assumptions here. First and foremost, it assumes that God is just good and just omnipotent. He's just all powerful. But in Islamic theology, we have 99 names and attributes of God that we can reconcile with reality. One of these include He's the wise. So there's wisdom behind these things. Now you may say, but I can't see the wisdom in the baby having cancer. That's fair enough. And we feel for this as well. But the issue is, it doesn't mean the wisdom's not there. That's an argument from ignorance. It's a logical fallacy. Argumentum ad ignoration. Also, it assumes that God doesn't have any morally justified reasons to permit evil in the first place. And I think He does. First and foremost, our primary purpose is not to have a party. It's not to boogie, okay? That's not our primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to basically know and worship God. That's the reality of who we are. Also, God created us for a test, and part of this test is to be tested with suffering and evil. As the Quran says, the one who created death and life. So He may put you to test to find which of you is best in deeds. He's the Almighty, the All-Forgiving. Also, God has given us free will, and this makes sense of personal human evil. Because if you didn't have free will, then it's like God making you do good all the time. If you made a universe that all human beings were always doing good, therefore there is no morality anymore, because it's like someone forcing you to do good all the time, which doesn't make sense of you being a moral agent in the first place. But I think the undercutting defeater to the problem of evil is actually, what do you mean by evil? do you mean it's objective? It's real? If that's the case, then it necessitates God's existence. Because God is the only metaphysical grounding that makes objective values objective. Because God is the conceptual anchor that transcends human subjectivity. So for you to claim that there's objective evil, it necessitates God's existence. Now if you say, well, it's not objective, which I don't want to build a straw man, but I heard some of your stuff, you don't believe in objective anything. If that's the case, your argument is probabilistic. It's like maybe, which is not a very strong argument in the first place. Also, I don't know how long I've got left.
A minute and a half.
That's not too bad. Well done. I would like, if you can, for us to really start to engage with each other, especially with the audience, especially the unique literary form of the Quran, because you didn't bring any undercutting defeaters to the unique literary form of the Quran. You didn't understand it by the sounds of it. You didn't bring any undercutting defeaters with regards to how the Quran talks about reality in a way that's not contingent on 7th century Arabia. The example I gave, you didn't address. You didn't even give any undercutting defeaters to the existence of God. You just have an issue about terminology, which is not an undercutting defeater. So really, from a philosophical perspective, you didn't break down the arguments. And the funny thing is, you never constructed any arguments for your particular worldview. Now, on the point of the Quran posing threats, well, the Quran says something very clear. Let's be holistic when we read things. It says, don't blame God what happens to you metaphysically. Blame yourself. It's the cause and effect from a spiritual perspective. God is not threatening you with this. In actual fact, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he was so worried about human beings. He was the true humanist. Because he didn't want people to suffer in this life or the hereafter. He didn't want people to go to hell. This is why he wanted to spread Islam as much as possible, to engage with human beings and just give them simply the message. And you have to realize that the Quran is an intellectual and emotional text that intrudes in the inner dimensions of man. And the way it does that is by asking questions. As I said before, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. And thus we explain our signs in detail for those who reflect. Thank you.